How long is PI planning? Welcome to Safe in the Real World, where together we go beyond scaled agile framework theory and explore the realities of implementing Safe. I'm Ahmed Syed, and in this video we are going to explore the realities of how long PI planning can be. I'm also going to explore options that can save you literally tens of thousands of pounds per PI if you stay till the end. You remember the PI planning event, right? The one where we plan the next 8 to 12 weeks for an Agile Release Train. But if you want to learn more about what PI planning actually is, then click the link around the video or below to watch that video and get an idea of what PI planning actually is. So you may say, well, hang on a minute, Ahmed. We all know that the standard PI planning is 2 days, right? And I'll say to you, yes, absolutely. But what my focus is in this and all my other videos is not the theory, but the realities that you will find on the ground and the options that are available to you that may actually differ from the theory. Sure, the standard agenda starts at 8 a.m. and it ends with the draft plan review at 5 p.m. and you have a management review and problem solving event as well on day one that can take the overall event from 8 to about 6 p.m. Okay, so that's the standard timeline. 2 days starting from about 8, finish to about 10 on day one, and then variable timing on day 2. Right? But here's the deal, right? Since COVID, PI planning has shifted from this really heavy focus to in-person, face-to-face communication to a remote planning setting as well, right? So now that's changed. That's added an additional factor which we now have to plan for and we need to now think about. So let's go through some of these options together, right? So as I said, look, we've got a couple of different options now over here. So we said, look, the standard PI planning that we have is 2 days, right? So there's 2 days in duration, okay? Now, what I've seen work as well is also 1 day events, and we're going to cover those as well, okay? I'm also going to see why you should be looking at different, or why you should at least consider different options as well, okay? And believe it or not, we're also going to discuss 3 days as well. Right, so this is the official duration for PI planning, these 2 day events. We're going to cover that in just a second, right? So now, as I said, right, we've got this unique situation. I'm somewhat unfortunate, a COVID situation where prior to this, the PI planning events were in person, and what I have seen in the past is what worked reasonably well was 1 day and 2 day events. Okay, and we're going to cover why you might want to look at a 1 day event as well. Okay, now the COVID scenario has brought in a new dynamic, right, where actually you could argue that the remote planning, because of the nature of remote planning, it's actually you might want to give more breaks, you might want to give and extend the timeline as well. So if we look at remote planning, then you might want to think of that as a 2 or a 3 day event, right? Okay, now the question is, right, you may say, okay, well, why should we be, if the standard is 2 days, you understand, you need to take more breaks and more have a more relaxed pace, if you like, right? If you're in remote planning. Understood, you understand that, that's why you have 3 days. But Ahmed, why do you have a 1 day event? Let's just look at that in a second, right? Now let's just say, for example, you have a small Agile Release Train. You guys remember what an Agile Release Train is, right? So the Agile Release Train is, how many? It's 5 to 12 agile teams, right? So you say 5 to 12 agile teams, typically between 50 and 125 people, right? But let's just keep the math simple. Let's just say we have an Agile Release Train which is just 100 people, okay? Let's just 100 people across multiple teams. So you got 100 people. Now let's do the maths. Let's just say, for example, in the UK and in Europe, probably if we say you end up spending about 400 per day for contractors and for permanent staff as well, by the time you take in holidays and all the other overheads and other things as well, right? Per person per day, right? So when you do the maths, basically you've got 100 people, they're all planning together, right? So you're actually spending £40,000 per day. Now I remember when I did the maths on this, and one of the executives, they freaked out. They were like, oh my God, we are not going to spend that much money on a planning event, right? Thank you very much. And so what they started to push for, these one-day events as well. The question I asked them, what would you achieve your objective for these 100 people if you were to skip the 2-day planning event, right? And you just didn't plan at all. Would you get to that outcome magically 2 days before, thereby saving this money? And of course the answer is absolutely, most likely you are not, that's not going to happen, right? So the planning event is a good investment in terms of the money that you actually save by having that increased coordination and people being clear in terms of what they actually need to do, right? Okay, so this here, the overall cost is a big factor, right? This is a big factor in terms of driving us from a 2-day event to, say, a 1-day event. Okay, but I'll tell you what I'd like to do is I'd like to just discuss here what is the official event, and then let's look at the different variations as well, right? So you got this 2-day event over here. Your program increments between 8 to 12 weeks long. Right, okay, and so there's obviously that overhead with this, which we've just talked about in terms of the cost as well. Okay, so now if we look at the standard PI planning agenda, right, which you're going to see over here on your screen over here, right, and if you look at that over there, what you are actually going to see is that you've got a number of different items that cover this 2-day event, right? And they effectively fit into 5 different elements, right? So the first bunch of sessions, right, they're about setting the scene. What's the business context? What does the solution look like? What's the vision? Blah blah blah. What's the architecture look like? What is the roadmap? Any other guidance you want to give to the teams? What are the product features, etc.? So the first few sessions are about setting the scene, right? The next batch is about team planning, right? Broadly speaking, right? Then you've got your scrums, all other things in there, but by and large, the outcome, what you're trying to achieve is your team planning. After that, you've got your group and your Agile Release Train planning, okay? So that's the third element of it, right? You finalize your plan, being the fourth, and the fifth is you learn to improve, right? So we want to continuously learn throughout this whole event, and we want to try and improve. So effectively, these 5 elements, they span across those 2-day events. Okay, so let's just have a look and see how that works, right? So if we have a 2-day option, pretty much day 1 is about setting the scene and about team planning. And some teams, yeah, they may be ahead and they can start to do some group planning, but by and large, that's what day 1 is about, right? Day 2 is about group planning and Agile Release Train planning, where the different teams, they come together, they work out their dependencies, they adjust their plans, they've now had time to work with themselves in day 1, and now they can work through the dependencies, and they put together the overall Agile Release Train plan on day 2. Right, okay. Now obviously on day 2 as well, you've got the retrospective, which is our option where we use our event, which we use to learn so that we can actually improve the next time we do that, right? So that's effectively what your standard 2-day planning is about, really, okay? And now there are multiple different ways you can you can achieve this outcome, okay? But as I said, right, when we're looking at this is a very heavy overhead, right? So let's look at what 1-day planning events look like, all right? So these are different beasts, right? I mean, I remember I've probably done about about between 10 and 15 of these in the past, and sometimes some of the feedback has been that these can feel a little bit rushed. And so one of the things that more recently I've started to recommend is to rather than try and just shove everything all into one day, the first thing is to setting the scene, the vision, the architecture, the business context, the product features, all of that. Do that as a pre-PI planning meeting, right, between 1 to 5 days before. Okay, and the feedback that I've got from the trains I've used is that it's found this really very valuable and very useful, and separating this out from the whole planning event is really quite a good thing as well. Okay. The second thing, on the planning day one, you've only got 1 day planning, right? So you actually do the beginning few sessions are about the individual planning. The next one is around the group planning with the Agile Release Train, and finally it's about finalizing the plan, right? Now your retrospective is not necessarily, you don't necessarily hold a retrospective if you don't have the time. So what I've done in the past that actually works quite well is you put the retrospective boards up there. If it's in person, then you have it over there, and you encourage the teams to come, and throughout the day they're updating that and they're adding that information. And if it's remote, you can also set up the remote boards as well. You've got lots of good remote opportunities over there as well. Okay, so in this way, by separating out that pre-PI planning and PI planning, you've got this really powerful mechanism over here to, guess what? I mean, save a lot of money, right? Save a lot of money by taking that 2 days into a 1 day event as well. Okay. All right. Now the 3 days, 3 day option. Now I see this mostly when we're doing remote PI planning. Okay, and as I said, that's because you want additional breaks and you might be more conservative with the number of planning hours. So what do we do then? So let's just have a quick look at this. If you look at the screen, what you see is on day one, we're setting the scene. We've got team planning happening. On day two, we might have our team planning continuing, and we commence our group planning. Okay. On day three, we conclude our group planning, we finalize a plan, and we have our retrospective over here on day three as well. Okay, so these are the 3 different options that you have. So what is it then? So effectively, your PI planning duration can last between 1 day and 3 days long. And so you've got a number of options over there. Okay, I hope you found this useful. If you've got any comments, which versions are you using, right? Have you been using version 1 day PI planning? Please, I'd really be interested to hear what your experience has been with that. 3 days or 2 days, what are you using? What are your recommendations? Please put your comments down, and please put your comments in the video below, and look forward to speaking to you in the next video. Thank you very much. Goodbye.